For the latest on the Trump administration's court ruling on tariffs and what's next, let's bring in U.S. Trade Representative Ambassador Jamieson Greer. It's great to have you on today. It was great last time. Welcome back. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me.
I guess we'll start with some of your comments about the rulings yesterday and the prospects for what is likely to happen. I know there's a lot of things that are being discussed right now. Do you think if we were to get emergency relief from the Supreme Court, you think they'd come down on the president's side? Do you think you have a strong case, or will it stand the way it is right now?
Well, I think we have a very strong case. Congress clearly delegated to the president the ability to take action when there's a national emergency. We've declared a national emergency. We've taken action. We have a stay from the circuit court right now. All the other countries I'm dealing with in negotiations are treating this as just kind of a bump in the road rather than any fundamental change. So I feel pretty confident about the case, and if the case, goes the other way, we have other tools as well.
Yeah, I've expressed that sentiment earlier that you don't know what you've got till it's gone. As a pure conservative and a markets type guy, tariffs, I think they can be effective, but there's times when you kind of wish that we would just maybe not be doing as many. But then we've come along so far, Mr. Ambassador, that to pull the rug out from the negotiating ability by making all these countries we're negotiating with think that the tariffs might not stick. That's frustrating. But you're telling me again that none of those countries expressed any. They weren't saying, all right, we're going to pull out of these negotiations because we don't need to anymore.
It's actually the opposite. When I woke up, the morning after the initial ruling, before we had the stay, I had emails and texts from foreign officials saying, we're just going to keep negotiating with you as before. We understand that these are, this is litigation. Things go up and down. We understand the U.S. policy going forward, and we're negotiating with you as before. So that's what's happening.
I guess you've read enough about some people view the emergency, that provision as maybe not being the best way to do it. Is it possible you would use the Trade Act of 1974? You get 150 days, and then you have to actually go on an individual basis and prove that tariffs are something to be done. Is that being looked at this point?
Well, first of all, it's important to understand that the president's trade team has been thinking about these legal tools for years, right? We have a lot of folks on TV and the internet who've been thinking about it for about 6 minutes. So, of course, these are things that we've been considering and talking about for a very long time. All these things are on the table. The reality is we have this enormous trade deficit. It got worse over the Biden years. And if we don't fix the global trading system, it's just going to get even worse going forward. And we have to fix it.
Right, but you think you could convince the Supreme Court that suddenly the Rubicon was passed in terms of the trade deficit, that now it's an emergency, but it hasn't been an emergency? We've had a trade deficit for decades. And I just think, isn't it hard to make the case suddenly it's reached that level, that it's now an emergency?
No, I don't think that's a problem. And in fact, the lower court that took issue with the president's action, it wasn't really on the nature of the emergency so much as their views on the implementation. The reality is the trade deficit has exploded by 40% over the past 4 years. It was $850 billion around the beginning of the Biden administration, ended at $1.2 trillion. So that's extreme by any measure. It's one thing to have a deficit or surplus that fluctuates over time, but to have it increase so substantially in such a short time and be accompanied, by also a worsening in our net international investment position, where we're at negative $26 trillion at the end of last year. I mean, this is crazy stuff where foreign firms and individuals have claims on U.S. assets in a way they've never had it before, and that's a dangerous situation.
James, this is what's happening in the markets is not you, as far as I can tell. There has been, President Trump just did post on Truth Social saying that, in his words, 2 weeks ago, China was in grave economic danger. The very high tariffs I set made it virtually impossible for China to trade in the United States marketplace, which is by far #1 in the world. We went, in effect, cold turkey with China, and it was devastating for them. Many factories closed. To put it mildly, there was civil unrest. I saw what was happening and didn't like it for them, not for us. I made a fast deal with China in order to save them from what I thought was going to be a very bad situation. And I didn't want to see that happen. Because of this deal, everything stabilized, got back to business as usual. Everybody was happy. That's the good news. Bad news is that China, perhaps not surprisingly, has totally violated its agreement with us. So much for being Mr. Nice Guy. Did you know about, you have a heads up about this?
I mean, this has been something we've been discussing ever since Geneva. You know, the president, you know, I speak to him nearly daily basis, as do his other advisors, and we've been very focused on monitoring Chinese compliance, or in this case, non-compliance, with the agreement. And we're very concerned with it. We moved, as the president just said, very quickly. No one can deny that. The United States did exactly what it was supposed to do, and the Chinese are slow rolling their compliance, which is completely unacceptable and has to be addressed.
Is it beneficial for this negotiation now to be effectively taking place in public? I mean, there's been some level of which this has already happened with us. We've actually been quieter, frankly, than they have to some degree. But the president's comments today, obviously, as we're watching the market, you know, this is complicating things.
Well, I mean, listen, I would say there are, you know, a lot of different ways to deal with folks. You make every effort to be diplomatic and professional and to do things behind closed doors. You know, but at some point, you know, the impact on the U.S. economy or the trade relationship becomes such that it's hard to withhold that anymore.
We might have gotten a little bit of a heads up on this from last night when the Treasury Secretary in an interview said that talks had completely stalled with China, and that it was going to take a phone call with President Trump to President Xi to get things back on track, and he expected that in the next couple of weeks. Can you say that? Is that in the works?
Yes, that's accurate. And, you know, the Treasury Secretary, you know, his characterization is accurate, of course. I would say that, you know, conversations and calls continue at lower levels. But ultimately, the nature of the things we're talking about, it does require some leader-to-leader understandings, right? We made a huge effort in Geneva to accommodate the Chinese. And listen, it always ends up being this way, whether it's the United States or other Western countries have always sought to accommodate the Chinese. We've had open markets, et cetera. And time again, you know, we see the Chinese come down and not comply with their agreements, you know, slow roll compliance, you know, not open their economy like they should. Right. So unfortunately, we're seeing that trend continue.
And I ask this effectively on behalf of just the folks who are watching us. Can you tell us specifically what they did or frankly didn't do in this case?
Well, remember, when the United States imposed reciprocal tariffs on the world, right? This wasn't China specific. There were other, you know, countries that had higher tariff rates than China assigned to them. China was the only country to retaliate. Remember that. And so the president was forced to retaliate to maintain the effectiveness of the tariff. Now, when the Chinese yeah, let me get to that. When the Chinese retaliated, it wasn't just with a tariff. They put in place countermeasures where they put certain U.S. companies on blacklists. They restricted the flow of rare earth magnets to us and other countries in the world. And so when they agreed in Geneva to remove their tariff and their countermeasures, they removed the tariff like we did, but some of the countermeasures they've slowed on. If you read the news, you can see that Europe, Japan, United States, elsewhere, we haven't seen the flow of some of those critical minerals as they were supposed to be doing.